The shrill ring of Alexander Morgan's private line cut through the silence of his corner office on the 52nd floor. Rain pelted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting shifting shadows across his mahogany desk. Few people had this number, and even fewer would dare call at 11:37 p.m. on a Friday. Alexander frowned at the unknown number lighting up his screen. "Morgan," he answered, voice crisp with authority that came naturally after 15 years as CEO of Morgan Enterprises. "Mr. Morgan?" The female voice on the other end was professional but strained. "This is Dr. Rebecca Winters from St. Michael's Hospital. I apologize for calling so late, but this is urgent." Alexander's grip tightened on his phone. Hospitals never called with good news. "I'm calling about Emily Collins." 5 years. It had been 5 years since he'd heard that name spoken aloud. 5 years since she'd walked out of his office and his life without looking back. "Emily?" His voice betrayed him, cracking slightly. "What's happened?" "Ms. Collins has been in a serious car accident. She's in critical condition and needs immediate surgery." The doctor paused. "She's lost a lot of blood, and she has a rare blood type." "B negative," Alexander interrupted. He knew because they'd once joked about it, how even her blood type was being negative. "Yes, exactly," Dr. Winters sounded surprised. "We're dangerously low on supply. Our records show you're a match." Alexander closed his eyes, memories flooding back. The brilliant marketing director who challenged him at every turn, her infectious laugh that could dissolve his stress after the most grueling board meetings. The way she'd looked at him the day she resigned, eyes brimming with unspoken words, and something that looked dangerously close to heartbreak. "Mr. Morgan?" Dr. Winters prompted. "I understand this is unexpected, but Ms. Collins doesn't have many options. You're her only hope right now." Alexander was already reaching for his suit jacket. "Text me the hospital details. I'm on my way." The storm had intensified by the time Alexander's Bentley pulled up to St. Michael's. He hurried through the automatic doors, rainwater dripping from his tailored overcoat onto the polished hospital floor. The harsh fluorescent lighting was a stark contrast to his dimly lit office. "I'm here for Emily Collins," he told the receptionist, trying to keep the urgency from his voice. "Dr. Winters is expecting me." Within minutes, he was being led through sterile corridors to a small waiting area where a tired-looking woman in scrubs approached him. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Dr. Winters. Thank you for coming so quickly." "How is she?" The question escaped before he could maintain his usually composed demeanor. "Still critical. We need to operate immediately." She gestured to a nearby room. "If you'll come this way, we'll get started with the blood donation." As Alexander rolled up his sleeve, questions tumbled through his mind. Why was Emily back in New York? Last he'd heard through business channels, she'd taken a position with a rival firm in Chicago. Who was with her now? Was there a husband, a partner, children? He deliberately avoided knowing these details for 5 years. "Is anyone else here for her?" he asked, trying to sound casual as the nurse prepared his arm. "Not yet. Her emergency contact is traveling back from Europe. Should arrive tomorrow." Dr. Winters hesitated. "The contact is listed as her sister, Jessica Collins." Jessica. Alexander remembered her, younger than Emily by 4 years, with the same chestnut hair, but none of Emily's fire, none of her brilliance, none of her courage. "You seem to know Ms. Collins well," the doctor observed, as the crimson liquid began filling the collection bag. "I used to," Alexander replied flatly, ending the conversation. Afterward, as he waited in the empty corridor outside the operating room, Alexander found himself standing at a metaphorical crossroads. He could leave now, his duty done, his conscience clear. Emily would never even need to know he was here. Or he could stay and face a past he'd spent 5 years trying to forget. The memories came unbidden. Emily's first day at Morgan Enterprises, her resume impeccable, her handshake firm, her green eyes meeting his without a trace of intimidation. She'd risen through the ranks with remarkable speed, her innovative marketing strategies transforming the company's public image. They'd worked closely together during that campaign, late nights and early mornings blurring the lines between professional and personal. Alexander checked his watch. Nearly 2 a.m. now. The surgery had been underway for over an hour. He should go home, get some rest before tomorrow's international conference call. Instead, he found himself walking toward the hospital chapel, a place he hadn't entered since his mother's passing 15 years ago. He sat alone in the dim room, the only illumination coming from a few flickering candles. He wasn't a praying man, but tonight, words formed silently in his mind. Let her live. Mr. Morgan? He turned to find a young nurse standing hesitantly in the doorway. Dr. Winters asked me to find you. The surgery is complete. Alexander stood abruptly. And? Ms. Collins is stable. She's being moved to recovery. Relief washed over him so intensely that he had to steady himself against the pew. Can I see her? The question surprised even him. She's still unconscious from the anesthesia, the nurse explained. But Dr. Winters said you could have a brief visit once she's settled. 20 minutes later, Alexander stood frozen in the doorway of room 417. The woman lying in the hospital bed barely resembled the vibrant force of nature he remembered. Emily's face was pale, a large bruise blooming across her left cheekbone, a bandage wrapped around her head, partially covering her hair, shorter now than when he'd known her. Various tubes and wires connected her to softly beeping machines. Alexander approached cautiously, as if she might suddenly awaken and order him out. Up close, he could see the delicate sweep of her eyelashes against her cheek, the small scar near her right eyebrow from a childhood fall she'd once told him about, and the gentle rise and fall of her chest that confirmed she was, indeed, still alive. On the bedside table sat her personal effects in a clear plastic hospital bag, a sleek smartphone with a cracked screen, a silver watch he didn't recognize, and something that made his heart stutter, a small worn business card with his old office number scribbled on the back. Alexander reached for it instinctively, but stopped himself. Whatever reason Emily had for carrying his outdated contact information, it wasn't his place to question it, not anymore. She'll likely remain sedated until morning, Dr. Winters said, appearing beside him. The next 24 hours are critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Alexander nodded, unable to tear his gaze from Emily's face. What exactly happened? Single-car accident on the West Side Highway. Witnesses say she swerved to avoid another driver who cut her off and hit the barrier. The airbag deployed, but the impact was significant. Will she... Alexander cleared his throat. Will there be lasting damage? It's too early to say for certain. There's some swelling in the brain that we're monitoring closely. The doctor's pager beeped, and she excused herself after promising to return soon. Alone with Emily, Alexander found himself sinking into the visitor's chair beside her bed. What were you doing on the West Side Highway, Emily? He murmured. What brought you back to New York? He reached out, hesitating before gently taking her limp hand in his. Her skin was cool to the touch, the familiar callus on her middle finger. Writer's bump, she'd called it, still present after all these years. Outside the window, lightning flashed, briefly illuminating the room in harsh white light, followed by a rumble of thunder that seemed to shake the building. The weather matched the turbulence Alexander felt within, a storm of questions, regrets, and unresolved feelings he'd thought long buried. As the night deepened around them, one question echoed loudest in his mind. After 5 years of silence, what would Emily Collins say when she opened her eyes to find him there? Dawn broke with muted colors through the rain-streaked hospital window. Alexander awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented until his eyes focused on Emily's still unconscious form. He hadn't meant to fall asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand still loosely holding hers. His back protested as he straightened, checking his watch, 6:17 a.m. His phone showed a dozen missed calls and twice as many messages, most from his executive assistant, Natalie, who'd undoubtedly discovered his unexplained absence from the early morning conference call with Tokyo. For the first time in his career, Alexander had completely forgotten a business obligation. A soft knock drew his attention to the door where a nurse entered, surprise flickering across her face at finding him still there. "Good morning, Mr. Morgan. I'm just here to check her vitals." Alexander withdrew his hand from Emily's and stood, smoothing his rumpled suit. "Any change overnight?" "Her readings are improving," the nurse replied while checking monitors. "Dr. Winters will be making rounds soon if you'd like to speak with her." He nodded, then stepped into the hallway to make a quick call to Natalie, providing a vague explanation about a personal emergency. He authorized her to reschedule his appointments and have Parker, his CFO, handle the Tokyo deal. Natalie, efficient as always, asked no questions, despite the unprecedented nature of his instructions. When Alexander returned to the room, he found Dr. Winters reviewing Emily's chart. "You're still here," she observed, her tone neutral but her raised eyebrow betraying her curiosity. "How is she doing?" "Better than expected. The swelling has begun to subside, and her vital signs are stabilizing." She glanced down at her notes. "Do you know if Ms. Collins has any medical conditions we should be aware of? Allergies, medications?" Alexander shook his head. "Not that I know of. We haven't been in contact for 5 years." Dr. Winters studied him thoughtfully. "May I ask what your relationship is to the patient? The nurse said you stayed all night." "We worked together," Alexander replied simply, offering nothing more. The doctor seemed to understand his reluctance. "Well, whatever your history, your blood donation made a critical difference. She's lucky you answered that call." After Dr. Winters left, Alexander found himself at another decision point. Emily's sister would arrive soon. His presence would require explanations he wasn't prepared to give, to Jessica, to Emily, or perhaps even to himself. The sensible choice was to leave before complications arose. Yet he couldn't bring himself to walk away, not until he knew Emily would recover, not until he understood why she still carried his business card after all this time. Alexander stepped out to find the hospital cafeteria, returning with a bitter coffee that he sipped while watching the steady rise and fall of Emily's chest. Around 8 o'clock, a text message arrived from his driver, Marcus, who had apparently been waiting patiently in the parking garage all night. Alexander instructed him to go home and return later with a change of clothes. Mid-morning sunlight had just begun breaking through the clouds when Emily's eyelids fluttered. Alexander set down his third coffee of the day, moving closer to the bed. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then blinking rapidly as they adjusted to the light. When her gaze finally settled on him, the monitor tracking her heart rate registered a noticeable spike. "Alex," her voice was barely a whisper, rough from the breathing tube that had been removed earlier. Something twisted in his chest at hearing her use the nickname only she had ever dared call him. "Hello, Emily." He kept his voice level, masking the tumult of emotions beneath. Confusion clouded her features as she glanced around the hospital room, then back to him. "Am I dreaming?" "You were in a car accident," he explained gently. "You're at St. Michael's." Emily's hand moved to touch the bandage on her head, wincing as her fingers made contact. "What are you doing here?" Before Alexander could answer, a nurse bustled in, alerted by the change in Emily's monitors. The woman's face brightened, seeing her patient awake. "Well, hello there. Let me call Dr. Winters right away." The next half hour passed in a flurry of medical activity, doctors checking responses, asking questions, adjusting medications. Alexander retreated to the corner of the room, considering slipping away during the commotion but finding himself rooted in place. When the medical team finally dispersed, leaving instructions for Emily to rest, they were alone again. The silence stretched between them, 5 years' worth of unspoken words filling the space. "You didn't answer my question," Emily finally said, her voice stronger now. "Why are you here, Alexander?" He moved back to her bedside, keeping a careful distance. "The hospital called me last night. You needed a blood transfusion, and apparently I'm still listed as a match in their system." Emily's eyes widened slightly. "You gave me blood?" "It seemed preferable to the alternative, Anne," he replied, attempting humor that fell flat. She looked away, focusing on the rain-speckled window. "Thank you." The words were simple but sincere. Alexander nodded, unsure how to navigate this strange reunion. 5 years ago, they'd been sitting in his office discussing quarterly projections and innovative marketing strategies. 5 years ago, she'd been his right hand, the one person who understood his vision for the company almost better than he did himself. 5 years ago, before everything imploded. "Jessica is flying in from London," he informed her. "Should be here soon." Emily's expression softened at the mention of her sister. "You remembered Jess?" "I remember everything," Alexander replied, before he could stop himself. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years between them seemed to dissolve. But Emily broke the connection first, shifting uncomfortably in the bed. "You don't have to stay. I'm sure you have more important things to do than babysit a former employee." The dismissal stung, but Alexander had long ago mastered the art of hiding his reactions. "You were never just an employee, Emily," She looked at him sharply, a flash of the old fire in her eyes. Then what was I exactly? The question hung dangerously in the air, the same one that had shimmered unspoken between them 5 years ago in his office, when professional lines had begun blurring into something neither of them had been prepared to name. Before Alexander could formulate a response, Emily continued, "It doesn't matter anymore. Ancient history, right? Morgan Enterprises has probably doubled its value since I left. I see your face on business magazines at the airport." "The company has done well," he acknowledged, deliberately sidestepping the personal angle of her question. "And you? Chicago treated you well?" A shadow crossed Emily's face. "I'm not in Chicago anymore." Alexander raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to elaborate, but she merely turned her gaze back to the window. The silence stretched again, loaded with unasked questions. "When can I leave?" Emily finally asked, clearly directing the question at the broader situation rather than at him personally. "Dr. Winters mentioned at least a few days of observation, given the head trauma." Emily sighed, frustration evident in the tightening of her jaw, a tell he recognized from boardroom negotiations years ago. She'd always hated being sidelined, even for a day. "I have commitments," she muttered. "Responsibilities. Whatever they are, they'll have to wait." Alexander's tone brooked no argument, falling easily into the authoritative cadence he'd often used during their working relationship. Emily's eyes flashed. "You don't get to tell me what to do anymore, Alexander. I don't work for you." The familiar spark of their old dynamic, her challenging his authority, him standing his ground, almost made him smile despite the circumstances. "No, but right now you're recovering from major surgery, and even you can't simply will yourself to health through sheer stubbornness." To his surprise, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "You haven't changed. Neither have you." The moment of levity faded as quickly as it had appeared. Emily closed her eyes briefly, fatigue evident in the lines of her face. "You should rest," Alexander said, softer now. "Will you be here when I wake up?" The vulnerability in her question caught him off guard. Alexander hesitated. "Do you want me to be?" Emily didn't answer immediately, seeming to weigh her response carefully. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "This is all so strange." Before Alexander could reply, his phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from the hospital reception desk, informing him that Jessica Collins had arrived and was being directed to Emily's room. "Your sister's here," he told Emily, tucking the phone away. Relief and something else, regret, flickered across her features. "You should probably go then." Alexander nodded, gathering his suit jacket from the back of the chair. At the door, he paused, turning back to look at her one last time. "For what it's worth, Emily, it's good to see you again. Even under these circumstances." Her expression softened. "Alex..." Whatever she was about to say was interrupted by the arrival of Jessica Collins, who burst into the room with wide, worried eyes that grew even wider when they landed on Alexander. "Mr. Morgan?" Jessica blinked in confusion. "What are you doing here?" "It's a long story, Jess," Emily interjected, extending a hand toward her sister. Jessica rushed to Emily's side, embracing her carefully around the tubes and wires. Over her shoulder, Emily's eyes met Alexander's. A silent message passed between them. "Unfinished business suspended for now. I'll check back later," Alexander said, nodding politely to Jessica before stepping into the hallway. As he walked toward the elevator, the weight of the past 12 hours settled heavily on his shoulders. His ordered, controlled life had been upended by one phone call, by the reappearance of the one person he'd never fully managed to forget. The question now was what he intended to do about it. Alexander returned to his penthouse apartment in Manhattan's Upper East Side, just long enough to shower and change into fresh clothes that Marcus had brought from his tailor. As the hot water washed away the physical remnants of his night in the hospital, his mind remained stubbornly fixed on Emily. Why had she left Chicago? What brought her back to New York? And most importantly, why had she kept his business card all these years? After dictating several urgent emails to Natalie and delegating 3 critical meetings to his executive team, Alexander found himself back in his Bentley, heading towards St. Michael's despite his better judgment. He told himself it was merely to check on her recovery, a courtesy to a former colleague whose life he'd helped save. Even in his own mind, the explanation rang hollow. When he arrived at Emily's room in the early afternoon, he found her alone, propped up against pillows, her hospital gown replaced with a soft grey t-shirt that made her look more like herself. The color had returned to her cheeks, and though the bruising had darkened, her eyes were clearer. She looked up from her phone as he entered, surprise registering briefly, before her expression turned carefully neutral. "You came back," she observed. Alexander held up a paper bag from Mercer Kitchen. "I thought you might appreciate something besides hospital food." A small smile touched her lips. "You remembered." "Tomato soup and grilled cheese with fontina and prosciutto." He placed the bag on her tray table. "Still your favorite?" "Some things don't change." Emily set her phone aside and reached for the bag. "Thank you." Alexander took a seat in the visitor's chair, noting the absence of her sister. "Jessica stepped out, gone to my apartment to get some things," Emily explained, carefully opening the container of soup. The familiar aroma filled the small room. "She'll be back this evening." Alexander nodded, watching as Emily took a small spoonful of soup, closing her eyes momentarily at the taste. For a few minutes they existed in surprisingly comfortable silence as she ate. "You didn't have to come back," Emily finally said, setting aside the half-eaten sandwich. "Blood donation complete, Good Samaritan duty fulfilled." "Is that what you think this is?" Emily met his gaze directly. "I don't know what this is, Alex. 5 years of silence and suddenly you're bringing me my favorite lunch." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I could say the same. 5 years without a word, and I find out you still carry my business card." Emily's hand moved instinctively toward the bedside table where her personal items sat, then stopped. A flush crept up her neck. "You went through my things." "I didn't have to. The hospital put your belongings in a clear bag." Alexander kept his tone even. "Why do you have it, Emily?" She looked away, focusing on adjusting her blanket with careful precision. "It's complicated. I have time." Emily sighed, finally meeting his eyes again. "I kept it as a reminder." "Of what?" "Of the biggest mistake of my professional career." The words stung more than Alexander expected. He sat back, maintaining his composed exterior while reassessing the meaning of the card. Not sentiment, then. Regret. "Walking away from Morgan Enterprises," she continued, "right when the Thompson merger was happening. It was a stupid career move." "You had your reasons," Alexander replied carefully. Emily's gaze sharpened. "Did I? Because 5 years later, I'm still not entirely sure what happened." The tension in the room thickened. They were approaching dangerous territory, the unspoken catalyst for her sudden departure. "You resigned," Alexander stated flatly. "Effective immediately, if I recall. Cleared out your office that same night." "After you made it abundantly clear that I should," Emily shot back, a flash of the old fire in her eyes. Alexander's brow furrowed. "I never asked you to leave. You didn't have to." Emily pushed her food tray away, her appetite apparently gone. "The board meeting made your position perfectly clear." Confusion rippled through him. "What are you talking about?" Emily stared at him incredulously. "The executive committee meeting. March 17th, 2019. I heard everything, Alexander." The date registered immediately in his mind. 3 days before she'd resigned. He'd presented the Thompson merger plan to the board, outlining the restructuring that would follow. "You weren't at that meeting." "No, but I was delivering the quarterly marketing reports to Bernard's office next door." Emily's voice had taken on an edge. "The walls between those boardrooms are apparently thinner than anyone realized." Alexander felt as though the ground were shifting beneath him. "What exactly did you hear?" "Enough." Emily's hands twisted in the blanket. "I heard Thompson's condition for the merger, replacing me with his nephew, and I heard you agree to it." The blood drained from Alexander's face as the missing piece of the puzzle finally slid into place. 5 years of wondering why his most trusted colleague had abandoned ship right before the biggest deal of his career, and the answer was a misheard conversation. "That's not what happened," he said quietly. "Don't lie to me, not now," Emily snapped. "I heard you say the words, 'Emily Collins won't be an issue after the merger.'" Alexander ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Because I was going to promote you to Chief Marketing Officer for the entire consolidated company, effective immediately after the deal closed. Thompson's nephew was getting your old position, but you were moving up. That was always the plan." Emily froze, her eyes widening. "What?" "It was supposed to be a surprise. The board had approved it unanimously the week before." Alexander's voice grew quieter. "I had the paperwork ready on my desk the day you resigned." The silence that followed was deafening, Emily stared at him, shock written across her features. "That's not possible," she finally whispered. "Thompson hated me. He blamed me for the campaign that targeted his market share. Which is precisely why I wanted you in the C-suite. You understood the market better than anyone." Alexander leaned forward again. "You really didn't know?" Emily shook her head slowly, wincing slightly at the movement. "When I heard you agree to get rid of me, I couldn't face you. Couldn't bear to hear you tell me personally that I was being replaced. So you resigned first." "I had 3 job offers within a week," she said, a hint of defiance returning to her voice. "The Chicago position paid almost double." Alexander stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. 5 years, he murmured. 5 years based on a misunderstanding. "It wasn't just about the job," Emily said softly. Their eyes met, and the air between them seemed to charge with unspoken feelings. Alexander knew exactly what she meant. In the months leading up to her resignation, their professional relationship had developed an undercurrent. Neither had acknowledged openly. Late nights reviewing strategies had stretched into dinner discussions that drifted far from work topics. Coffee meetings had lingered long past their scheduled end times. There had been moments, a hand touching while passing documents, eyes meeting across the conference table, a shared laugh over inside jokes no one else understood, that suggested the potential for something more. "No," he agreed. "It wasn't just about the job." Emily looked away first, blinking rapidly. "It doesn't matter now. Ancient history. Is it?" Alexander moved closer to her bed. "Then why keep the card, Emily? Why carry a reminder of your biggest professional mistake for 5 years?" Before she could answer, the door opened and Dr. Winters entered with a tablet in hand. "Miss Collins, good to see you sitting up and alert," she nodded to Alexander. "Mr. Morgan." The doctor reviewed Emily's latest test results, explaining that while the recovery was proceeding well, she still needed to remain under observation for at least another 48 hours. "The brain scan shows the swelling continuing to decrease," Dr. Winters explained, showing them images on her tablet. "But you experienced significant trauma, and we need to be cautious." Emily nodded, though Alexander could see the frustration in her expression. "Has she mentioned why she was on the West Side Highway?" he asked the doctor. Dr. Winters looked between them curiously. "The police report indicates Ms. Collins was returning from a meeting in New Jersey. Something about a land development project." Alexander's eyebrows rose. The last he'd heard, Emily had been working in brand management for a retail conglomerate in Chicago. "I've recently changed fields," Emily explained, noting his surprise. "I'm heading up community relations for Westview Development now." "Real estate development?" Alexander couldn't hide his astonishment. "That's quite a shift from marketing." "People can change, Alexander." Emily's tone was defensive. "Westview's focus on sustainable community development aligned with what I wanted to do next." Dr. Winters, sensing the tension, excused herself after reminding Emily to rest and promising to check back in the evening. Once they were alone again, Alexander studied Emily with new interest. "Westview? Aren't they the ones planning that controversial Hudson Yards extension?" Emily sighed. "Yes, and before you start, I know all about the environmental concerns. That's precisely why I took the job, to help them find a better approach." Alexander held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "I wasn't criticizing, just surprised. Life takes unexpected turns." Emily's voice softened. "After Chicago, things changed. I needed something different." "What happened in Chicago?" Emily was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her blanket. "Success, by conventional standards. I became the youngest VP in the company's history. Had the corner office, the expense account, the whole package." She looked up at him. "And I was completely miserable." Alexander waited, sensing there was more to the story. "The culture there was toxic, cutthroat in ways that made Wall Street look tame." Emily's expression hardened. The final straw was watching them deliberately bury safety concerns about a children's product because a recall would hurt quarterly earnings. "You left over an ethical concern," Alexander said softly, a hint of pride in his voice. "That sounds like the Emily Collins I knew." "I reported them to consumer protection agencies on my way out," she added, with a ghost of her old smile. "Then took some time to figure out what I really wanted." "And that's Westview?" Emily nodded. They're trying to do something that matters, creating affordable, sustainable communities. At least that's what I thought until yesterday's meeting. Her expression darkened. Turns out the New Jersey project is being secretly restructured to maximize luxury units at the expense of the affordable housing they promised. Understanding dawned on Alexander. That's why you were driving back so late. You were upset about the meeting. I was furious, Emily admitted, thinking about resigning. Again. She gave a bitter laugh. Seems to be a pattern with me. Standing by your principles isn't something to apologize for, Alexander said firmly. Emily studied him for a moment. You've changed too. Have I? The Alexander Morgan I knew would have told me that principles don't pay dividends, he smiled ruefully. Perhaps I've learned a few things in 5 years as well. Their eyes held, and for a moment, Alexander felt the pull of what might have been, what might still be if they could navigate past the wreckage of misunderstanding between them. The moment was interrupted by Emily's phone chiming with an incoming message. She glanced at it, her expression immediately shifting to concern. What is it? Alexander asked. Westview, she replied, typing a quick response. They're asking when I'll be back. There's a critical presentation to community stakeholders tomorrow. Surely they don't expect you to... They do, Emily cut him off. And honestly, I need to be there. If I'm not, they'll proceed with the modified plan and the affordable housing component will be gutted. Alexander frowned. Emily, you've just had major surgery. I'm aware, she replied dryly, but some things are more important than perfect health. Like martyring yourself for a company that clearly doesn't value your well-being. The words hung in the air between them, sharp and unexpected. Emily's gaze snapped to his, surprise evident in her expression. Is that what you think I'm doing? She asked quietly. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair again. I think you're still the most dedicated, principled professional I've ever known, and I think some corporate entity is taking advantage of that, just like they did in Chicago. Emily's phone chimed again, but this time she ignored it, her attention fully on Alexander. Why do you care? After 5 years, why does it matter to you what I do? The question stripped away pretenses, demanding honesty Alexander wasn't sure he was ready to give. But sitting here with Emily, knowing how close he'd come to losing her forever to a random accident, made the risk of honesty seem smaller than the certainty of regret. Because despite everything, he said quietly, you've always mattered to me, Emily. More than you know. Emily's breath caught at Alexander's words, the heart rate monitor betraying her reaction with a quickened beep. For a moment, the years between them seemed to compress into nothing, leaving only the raw truth of his admission hanging in the air. Before she could respond, the door swung open again as Jessica returned, arms loaded with a duffel bag and what appeared to be Emily's laptop case. She stopped short at the palpable tension in the room. Sorry, am I interrupting? She asked, glancing between them. No, Emily said quickly, composing herself. Perfect timing. Alexander stood, smoothing his already immaculate suit jacket. I should go. I have some matters to attend to at the office. Emily nodded, but their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary, a silent acknowledgement that their conversation was far from over. Mr. Morgan, Jessica said as he moved toward the door, could I speak with you in the hallway before you leave? Alexander followed her outside, curiosity piqued by the serious expression on the younger Collins sister's face. Thank you, Jessica said once they were out of Emily's earshot. The doctor told me what you did, the blood donation, staying all night. She hesitated. Emily might be too stubborn to fully appreciate it, but I do. No thanks necessary, Alexander replied. How is she really doing? Jessica sighed. Physically? Better than she should be, according to the doctors. But emotionally? She shook her head. She's already talking about leaving the hospital tomorrow for some work presentation. I heard, Alexander frowned. It's not medically advisable. It's not just that. Jessica lowered her voice further. This job at Westview, it's been eating her alive for months. The stress, the ethical compromises they keep pushing. She met his eyes directly. You know how she is. She can't step away from a fight when she thinks people are being wronged. Alexander's mouth quirked in a half smile. I remember. The thing is, Jessica continued, this presentation tomorrow. It's her last stand. The executives have already made up their minds about cutting the affordable housing. Emily's just beating herself against a brick wall. Why are you telling me this? Jessica studied him for a long moment. Because for 5 years my sister has measured every job, every company, every boss against you and Morgan Enterprises. Nothing has ever matched up. The revelation struck Alexander like a physical blow. She never told me exactly what happened between you two, Jessica added, but I know she's regretted leaving ever since. Too proud to admit it, of course. Alexander absorbed this information silently, the pieces of the past 5 years rearranging themselves in his mind. I should get back to her, Jessica said, glancing toward the room. She'll be suspicious if we talk too long. Jessica, Alexander called softly as she turned away. Thank you. With a small nod, Jessica disappeared back into Emily's room, leaving Alexander alone in the corridor, his mind racing with possibilities he'd long ago forced himself to stop considering. Instead of heading to the elevator, he pulled out his phone and dialed a number he rarely used personally. Michelle, it's Morgan, he said when the call connected. I need everything you can find on Westview Development, particularly their New Jersey project and the proposed changes to the affordable housing component. Yes, it's urgent, within the hour. That evening, Alexander returned to the hospital with dinner for both Collins sisters, this time from Emily's second favorite restaurant, a small Italian place in the village they'd frequented during late working sessions. He found Emily sitting fully upright in bed, her laptop open, despite Jessica's obvious disapproval. You're pushing yourself too hard, Jessica was saying as he entered. I don't have a choice, Emily replied, not looking up from her screen. If I don't finalize these changes to the presentation... She stopped abruptly upon noticing Alexander. You're back. With reinforcements, he replied, holding up the takeout bags. Proper dinner for both of you. Jessica's expression brightened immediately. Is that Angelo's lasagna I smell? And eggplant parmesan, Alexander confirmed, setting the bags on the small table by the window. Emily's favorite, if memory serves. Emily closed her laptop slowly, surprise evident on her face. You remembered that too. As I said earlier, he replied simply. I remember everything. The three of them shared the meal around Emily's bed, the conversation remaining carefully in neutral territory. Jessica's teaching position in London, the unusually rainy New York spring, a mutual acquaintance from the old days who had recently launched a successful startup. Throughout the meal, Alexander found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Emily, noting the slight crease between her brows that indicated pain she was trying to hide, the way she pushed food around her plate, more than eating it. When Jessica excused herself to take a call from her boyfriend in London, Alexander moved closer to Emily's bedside. You're overdoing it, he said quietly. I'm fine, she insisted, though the tightness around her eyes betrayed her. Dr. Winters says you shouldn't leave for at least another 48 hours. Emily shook her head. I don't have 48 hours. The stakeholder presentation is at 10 a.m. tomorrow. If I'm not there, Westview will proceed with cutting the affordable housing component, Alexander finished. I know. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly. Jessica talked to you. She's worried about you. So am I. Emily sighed, leaning back against her pillows, momentary vulnerability breaking through her determined facade. This project matters, Alex. 300 families who were promised affordable homes. The community worked with Westview in good faith, and now they're about to be betrayed because luxury condos offer a better return on investment. Alexander pulled his phone from his pocket, opening a document. The profit differential is projected at $8.7 million over 5 years, primarily from the high-end retail spaces that would replace the community center in the original plan. Emily stared at him. How do you know that? I had my team look into Westview this afternoon, he replied casually, as if having a multi-billion-dollar company's resources investigate her employer was the most natural thing in the world. Their finances are actually quite precarious. The Jersey project is over-leveraged, and they're counting on the luxury pivot to satisfy creditors. Emily's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. That's why they've been so desperate to make the changes. The company might not survive otherwise. Alexander nodded, which puts you in an impossible position tomorrow. Either advocate for a plan that betrays the community, or fight for the original vision and potentially sink the entire company, including all the existing affordable housing projects they've built. There's no good choice, Emily murmured, the weight of the situation evident in her voice. Unless, Alexander said carefully, a third option emerged. Emily's eyes sharpened with interest. What kind of third option? Morgan Enterprises has been looking to diversify our holdings with sustainable community development projects, Alexander said, the plan he'd been formulating all afternoon finally taking shape aloud. What if we offered to partner with Westview? We provide the capital they need. They maintain their commitment to affordable housing. Emily stared at him, disbelief written across her features. You'd do that? Why? Alexander held her gaze steadily. For the 300 families, of course. Alex, and for you, he admitted softly, because this matters to you. The moment stretched between them, charged with meaning neither could fully articulate. Emily's eyes searched his, perhaps looking for ulterior motives or conditions to this unexpected offer. I don't know what to say, she finally whispered. Say you'll stay in the hospital tomorrow, and let me handle the presentation with Westview's executives. Emily's stubbornness reasserted itself. I can't just— Emily, Alexander interrupted gently. You nearly died yesterday. Your body needs rest to heal. Let me do this for you, for the project. Something in his tone must have reached her, because after a long moment, Emily nodded reluctantly. Okay, but I need to brief you on all the details. Relief washed through Alexander. I have all night. The next morning, as sunlight streamed through the hospital window, Emily watched Alexander adjust his tie in the small bathroom mirror. They'd worked until nearly midnight, going over every aspect of the Westview project, every argument she'd planned to make at the stakeholder meeting. Remember, she said for perhaps the 10th time, the community center is non-negotiable. It's the heart of the entire development. Alexander turned to her with a patient smile. Full-size gymnasium, classrooms for continuing education, daycare facility and health clinic. Minimum 50,000 square feet. I've got it, Emily. She fidgeted with her blanket. And the retail spaces should prioritize local businesses, not chains. We promised the neighborhood committee 50% of retail leases reserved for local entrepreneurs with subsidized rent for the first 3 years, he recited. You've prepared me well. Emily fell silent, watching him gather the presentation materials they'd revised together. Something had shifted between them during the night, a tentative rebuilding of the trust that had once bound them so closely. I'll call you as soon as the meeting ends, Alexander promised, checking his watch. Try to rest. Alex, Emily called as he reached the door. When he turned back, she swallowed hard. Thank you, not just for this, but for everything. Coming when the hospital called, staying. The smile he gave her then was unlike any she'd seen before, open, unguarded. Always Emily. After he left, Emily found herself unable to rest despite her body's demands. Her mind kept cycling through the previous 24 hours, the revelations about her resignation 5 years ago, Alexander's unexpected confession that she had always mattered to him, and now his willingness to step in at Westview. Jessica, who had gone to fetch coffee, returned to find her sister staring pensively out the window. You're thinking too loudly, she observed, handing Emily a paper cup of decaf. He'll do fine at the meeting. I know he will, Emily replied. That's not what I'm thinking about. Jessica raised an eyebrow. Then what? 5 years, Jess. Emily shook her head slowly. 5 years based on a misunderstanding. I heard Alexander agreeing to get rid of me after the merger, but he was actually planning to promote me. Wow, Jessica breathed, settling into the visitor's chair. That's quite a miscommunication. I never gave him a chance to explain. Just handed in my resignation and left. Emily's voice tightened with emotion. I was so hurt, so angry, I couldn't bear to hear him say the words himself. Pride has always been your Achilles heel, Jessica said gently. Emily nodded, acknowledging the truth in her sister's words. What if I'd just confronted him, asked directly about what I'd heard? Everything might have been different. Do you regret it? Leaving? Emily considered the question carefully. Not entirely. I needed the experiences of the past 5 years. Chicago, the ethical crisis there, finding my way to Westview. I've grown in ways I wouldn't have otherwise. But, Jessica prompted, sensing the unfinished thought. But I've missed him, Emily admitted quietly. Missed working with someone who challenged me, who understood me, who valued the same things I did. Jessica smiled knowingly. Just working with him, huh? Emily flushed slightly. Don't start. Em, you've been carrying his business card for 5 years. I think we're past the point of pretending there wasn't something more there. Before Emily could respond, her phone chimed with an incoming message. Alexander texting from outside the meeting room. About to start. Westview executives suspicious but listening. We'll update soon. Emily typed a quick response wishing him luck, then set the phone aside with a sigh. It doesn't matter now anyway. Even if we've cleared up the misunderstanding, too much time has passed. We're different people. Are you? Jessica challenged. Because from what I've seen in the last day, you two still have the same connection you always did. The hours of the morning crawled by. Emily tried to distract herself with television, with catching up on emails, with the crossword puzzle Jessica brought from the gift shop. Nothing worked. By noon, she was checking her phone every few minutes, anxiety building. Finally, just past 1 o'clock, it chimed with Alexander's call. Well, she answered immediately. It's done, came his steady voice. Morgan Enterprises will provide the necessary capital, and Westview has signed a binding agreement to maintain the original plans for affordable housing and the community center. Relief flooded through Emily so intensely she felt lightheaded. Really? They agreed to everything? Everything, Alexander confirmed. In fact, they've agreed to increase the affordable component by an additional 50 units. How did you manage that? She could hear the smile in his voice. I might have pointed out that the community goodwill would translate to expedited approvals for their next 3 projects, more than offsetting the reduced margin on this one. Emily laughed softly. Classic Morgan negotiation tactics. I learned from the best, he replied. There is one other development you should know about. Something in his tone made Emily sit up straighter. What is it? Westview's board has agreed to create a new position, Executive Vice President of Community Development. They've offered it to me with a seat on their board. Emily blinked in confusion. They offered you a job, but you're the CEO of Morgan Enterprises, which I would remain. This would be a dual role overseeing the partnership between our companies. Alex, that's unexpected. Actually, he continued, his voice softening, the position was created for you, Emily. I told them you were the one with the vision and principles to ensure this partnership maintains its community focus. The board position is yours if you want it. Emily was momentarily speechless. I don't understand. It's simple. You were right about Westview's mission but concerned about their execution. Now you'll have the authority to ensure they stay true to their promises. And, he added, you'll be working directly with me again as our companies collaborate. The implication wasn't lost on Emily. This wasn't just about a job or a development project. It was Alexander offering her a way back into his life, professionally, and perhaps more. When can we discuss this further? She asked, her heart racing with possibilities. I'm on my way to you now, he replied. 3 months later, Emily stood at the podium on a bright summer morning, the ceremonial shovel gleaming beside her as she addressed the gathered crowd of community members, officials, and reporters. Today marks not just the groundbreaking for Riverfront Commons, she announced, but a new model of community-centered development, 350 affordable homes, a state-of-the-art community center, retail spaces for local entrepreneurs, and green infrastructure throughout. From her position, she could see Alexander in the front row, his proud smile warming her more than the June sunshine. Beside him sat Jessica, who had extended her visit to the States to witness this moment. This project represents what's possible when business interests align with community needs, Emily continued, when profit and purpose work together rather than in opposition. After the speeches and the ceremonial first shovels of dirt, after the handshakes and interviews, Emily found herself standing with Alexander at the edge of the property, overlooking the Hudson River. Congratulations, Executive Vice President Collins, he said, offering her a glass of champagne from the reception. Your vision is becoming reality. Emily smiled, taking the glass. Our vision. I couldn't have done this without you. I beg to differ. You would have found a way eventually. You always do. His expression grew more serious. I'm just grateful I got to be part of it this time. Emily turned to face him fully. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of professional collaboration as they established the partnership between Morgan Enterprises and Westview. They had fallen easily back into their working rhythm, the years apart seeming to fade with each shared meeting, each late-night strategy session. Yet something had changed between them, a new openness, a willingness to acknowledge the personal connection that had always simmered beneath their professional relationship. "Alex," Emily said softly, "I've been thinking about what you said in the hospital. About me always mattering to you." He met her gaze steadily. "I meant it." "I know," she took a deep breath. "You've always mattered to me too. Even when I was angry, even when I thought you'd betrayed me. I kept your card all those years because I couldn't let go. Not completely." Alexander reached out slowly, taking her free hand in his. The touch was simple but electric, 5 years of distance collapsing in an instant. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Emily smiled, squeezing his hand. "Forward, together, one step at a time." As the summer breeze carried the sounds of celebration from the groundbreaking reception, Emily realized that sometimes the most unexpected detours, even those born of misunderstanding and pride, could lead exactly where you were meant to be all along. Later that evening, as they shared dinner on the terrace of Alexander's penthouse, the city lights twinkling below them, Emily raised her glass in a toast. "To second chances," she said, "in business and in life." Alexander touched his glass to hers, his eyes never